Good morning, trustees, faculty, staff, alumni, and students, and friends of the college. It's an honor to be here. In 1978, two female clinical psychologists coined the term the imposter syndrome. And if you're not familiar with it, the concept describes high-achieving individuals who are marked by an inability to internalize their accomplishments and a persistent fear of being exposed as a fraud. And I can tell you this morning, with my colleagues and probably, I won't say majority, but lots of PhDs in the room, I woke up with a bad case of the imposter syndrome, of which my mother helped clarify for me last night at the dinner when she said to me, "You know, Libby, I am really proud of you, but you know the others both have PhDs." So, I want to begin by expressing my appreciation for a great couple of days to the physics department and Dr. Maggie Shearer, who, when I asked her if her passion was astronomy, since that's what her PhD is in, looked at me and said, "Well, you'd think it would be, but honestly, my passion is teaching." For organizing my visit with Dr. Philpott, who was a professor at the time I was here and who also loved teaching, and also to the students and the other physics professors for letting me sit in on the Thursday afternoon session where students talk about their research projects and teach the other students what they are learning. And I believe the best way to learn is to teach. I'd like to thank the staff, specifically Andrea Malone and Susan Tiedemann, who got me to admit somehow in a student panel that one of the rules I broke while I was here, where you had to be in the dorms with the door open, 1 foot on the floor if you had boys in there, that got me to admit that yes, I in fact, with some sorority sisters, did help squeeze some chubby boys through this narrow window of Simple Hall after hours. I'd like to thank my mother and father who believed so much in the value of education and helped me pay for all of my degrees because they believed that it was so important. My stepfather, Dr. William Reed, who is a longtime dentist in Kearney, who without him I would never even really known about William Jewell. My husband, who I married because he is smart, and never believed that my job would be more than 50% in terms of raising children or keeping the household. And finally, our two children, Ellie and Henry, who are in school today, but have put up with all kinds of conversations in our family about vectors versus scalars, which prompted my daughter to recently post on Instagram, "This just happened. My family is discussing vectors and scalars." And finally, I can't say enough how thrilled I am to be honored in a time where 4 months ago, the first female president of the university was inducted, I think that's the right word, and where in a year of the school is starting an engineering program. So I feel very lucky to have that. So last night, Luz talked about the importance of a circuitous path when it comes to a liberal arts education, and I can guarantee you that my path was certainly circuitous in terms of getting here. After a first semester freshman year at Tulsa University, where I majored in petroleum engineering, and a second semester at Mizzou, where I decided I would go into journalism, I finally landed on my third semester at William Jewell with a major in physics. I was the only physics major in my class and the only one in my sorority to be a physics major. And in fact, at that time, really physics majors were physics majors, so there wasn't a lot of extracurricular activities. And so to be in a Cardinal Blazer and to be in a sorority was pretty unusual back then. Now I will tell you, yesterday on that Thursday class, that has changed dramatically. So first of all, a third of the students are now female. I was the only one at the time. And there are at least 2 baseball players and an Oxbridge candidate that got up and shared what they were talking about for their research projects. So that has definitely changed dramatically. I will also tell you that yesterday, Dr. Philpott looked at me and said, "I wish I had my grade book from the year that you were in school," of which I promptly said, "No, no, no." And he's like, "No, not to look at your grades, but to remember who else was in your class." I reminded him of who I remembered in my class at the time, and reminded him or recalled a time in modern physics when there were two of us in that class, and Dr. Gilker, after an exam, put up both of our scores on the whiteboard for everybody to see, he and I. And the male colleague of mine, I think, was at least in the 90s, very smart, and I was probably in the 50s or 60s, and so I definitely had my share of humble pie in terms of the physics degree. And I also remember Dr. Nita Gilker, who the one time I was going to skip class, I'm not kidding you, I never skipped class, it just wasn't part of my makeup, but the one time, and back then, chapel was on Thursday mornings, I think at 9 a.m., and so that was typically the morning that students would sleep in after having gone out the night before. But no, not me, I had a 7:45 a.m. class, so yet I went out the night before, and that one time I was going to skip class, Dr. Nita Gilker called me in my dorm room and said, "Libby, you're missing class right now," of which I promptly got up and got to class. I want to briefly talk about what I learned from Jewell, and then, despite my lack of a PhD, I want to do just a little bit of teaching. So some things I learned at Jewell. First of all, how to be transparent and open. And one of the best examples I have of this was Dr. Gordon Kingsley, who was the president at the time I was here, would, downstairs in the cage, which was kind of the student union area, would take questions that students had written on a 3x5, any question that you wanted to ask, post the question up, and then promptly post an answer. And I took that with me when I was the plant manager just up the street here at the Hallmark Distribution Center, where I was responsible for about 1,200 employees. And one of the best ways I found to be transparent and to answer all kinds of questions, some of them, frankly, very controversial, was to take the question just as it was written, post it up on the pin board, and next to it, put my response. And I spent many late hours writing responses, drawing pictures, creating more questions, but I do believe still to this day that the transparency and openness really gained me a lot with the employees up at that distribution center. I also learned how to be a servant leader. Now, my parents modeled giving. I told the students a couple of nights ago that my dad had a rare blood type, and every time the Red Cross would call, he would immediately donate blood, every single time. And my own grandfather, who was on the original board of directors as a part of the Rural Electrification Administration back in 1939. So I have a history of modeling of giving, but it really wasn't until I came to William Jewell that I volunteered on my own. By that I mean no parents were saying, hey, come along. No group was saying, we're gonna go do this for philanthropy. I really decided that I wanted to participate in the community, and I started by volunteering with the Kansas City Literacy Association, where I would sit with adults and help them learn how to read. Now, I was carrying 17 hours, as you do in physics, working 20 hours a week, doing cardinal blazing and sorority, so perhaps that's why my GPA wasn't quite as good as I'd hoped. But as a result of that positive experience in the modeling of professors, I have pursued a path of volunteer board work, focusing on passion areas, women in STEM through the Society of Women Engineers or through the Girl Scouts, or through the importance of urban neighborhoods that are built in combination with the people that live in the neighborhood, avoiding gentrification and making sure that people can live, shop, go to school in their own communities. And frankly, as I sought out Hallmark as a place to work, they are, as probably most of you know, a very generous and philanthropic organization. But the day that I became senior manager, Carol Hallquist, one of our own trustees, promptly called me on the phone and said, now Libby, which board will you be on this year? So it has always just been expected and part of my lifelong learning, as it is of Jewell, to do servitude. I learned here how to learn by asking questions, and at Hallmark I have a reputation for asking tough questions, and especially for asking questions that other people want to ask but are just afraid to ask. I learned how to be an expert and simultaneously be humble. Having a point of view when you know you're the expert, and listening, admitting frequently that you don't know when you don't know. And finally, one of the most important things in this critical mindset place is the importance of keeping an open mind. And I just want to talk a little bit about something that's happening right now in our time frame, and that is Penn Law professor Amy Wax sparked extensive criticism last year after she co-wrote a pretty contentious editorial article promoting bourgeois cultural values. Now, we might not agree with the values that she talked about, but I think what is important that happened to her at a school such as Penn, her colleagues immediately started writing letters saying, it's not right for you to say these things. You shouldn't be speaking up in this situation. And I would say, you know, it prompted her to write a second article that was titled, Are We Free to Discuss America's Real Problems? Of which the Wall Street Journal called it, What Can't Be Debated on Campus. And what I can tell you is after spending not just the last few days here, but many times have I been on campus with students since I graduated, this most certainly is a campus where things can be debated. And I hope and I'm sure that that will continue to happen. Okay, so those are some of the things I learned. I want to briefly teach for a second. And I want to talk to you about a couple of things. And the first one I want to talk about is grades. Grades are important. They mostly reflect how well you know the material, and frankly, they give you lots of options. They give you options on how many schools you can look at when you're looking at grad schools. They even give you options in terms of what companies are going to be interested in interviewing you. So I will tell you that grades are very important. But I will tell you in math and science, what happens between girls and boys is quite astounding after all these years. And that is that girls in high school, if they aren't making straight A's, they will absolutely say, I am not smart enough to pursue physics. I'm not smart enough to pursue engineering. And the boys that are making even the B's and sometimes C's in calculus will raise their hands and say, I'm going to go pursue engineering. And that's still happening today. And I think even in this room, we probably have some young women who, getting their first D or F on a physics exam, thought for a minute or maybe longer, I'm getting out of this, I can't do this. And they dropped the major. And that's in fact what happened to me, which is why I pursued journalism. But then I was like, wait a minute, if these guys can do this, I can do this. And I promptly got back into it. So grades are important, but I think we have to remember that we need technical people in this world, and B's and C's will get you good jobs as well and help you contribute. The second thing is still of encouraging women to go into STEM careers. When I was 16, at a Thanksgiving dinner, my aunt said, when we were talking about, you know, what do you want to do in college, et cetera, and I said, well, I want to be a petroleum engineer. She said, girls can't be engineers, of which I promptly, having been a high school debater, argued with her back and forth. And then when I got in the car, and my parents this whole time were saying nothing, I got into the car pretty tearfully and said to my parents, why did you not defend me when she said something as ludicrous as girls could not be engineers? My mother promptly said, well, you seem to be holding your own against her, so you didn't need me to speak up for you. But yet still today, about 20% of bachelor students in physics about 20% of the students in both physics and engineering are women. And while that does grow, it's pretty much met a plateau. And it's things like getting girls interested in math and science beyond middle school. So they're very interested in it until middle school comes, and then they have to raise their hand in a classroom and say an answer in front of a bunch of boys. And the boys, again, will raise their hand before they know the answer, and the girls will raise their hand when they're 150% sure that they know the answer. And I do think there's a place for single-sex education in things like math and science. I will also tell you that another way to appeal to women in math and science is to talk to them about helping people. So in medicine and in law, we or at least are equal in terms of the number of women going into those careers. And what I hear women say very frequently is, just want to help people. And what I try to explain to women is if you are in a third world country and you're teaching a mother how to filter the local water with her sari, which is what civil engineers can do and have done, then you enable her daughters to go to school instead of spending their entire day slugging water from the fresh source back to their families. So when you do things like that, you are truly helping people. The year after I graduated, Mattel came out with a Barbie that said, math class is tough. And promptly, after a lot of advocacy from people like the Society of Women Engineers, they removed that Barbie. But frankly, what I see today is when young girls go to their moms and say, can you help me with this math problem? And the mom says, I was horrible at math, please go talk to your dad. And that may be true, she may have been horrible at math, but we cannot afford to say those kinds of things. And some people think it might be ludicrous. That one statement really can make a difference. It can. And lastly, I would say that we know that women collegiates, while they are interested in physics and biology and chemistry and engineering, they're also interested in other things, like being in a sorority, playing on a sports team, going overseas for a semester. And in many schools, those things are not possible. But I know at William Jewell they are, and that's important to be able to allow a broad diversity of experiences while you're in school. The last thing I want to teach is I just want to quickly talk about servitude. Now I know I'm preaching to the choir in this room because this room knows all about servitude. But I will tell you that when you leave this college, if you can only give $5 a month until you can give more, give $5 a month. Don't lose connection with your school, and give your time, talent, and treasure. Because if we're not doing that, if we're not paying it forward for the kids that come behind us, whether our own kids, kids of our friends, or kids from the urban neighborhood, then we're really not doing the job that we have been so lucky to have in terms of our education. So with that, I hope you appreciate a little bit of my teaching and a lot of my learning from William Jewell. It's been a great experience. I had a lot of fun. I learned a lot, and I'm so honored to be with you today. Thank you.